The sun was barely up over the small town of Lancaster, Pennsylvania, when Jake Thompson pulled on his boots and stepped into the dew-covered backyard. The air was still crisp with the scent of early summer grass. This was his favorite time of day, quiet, full of promise, and just right for the morning routines he had started to grow fond of over the past year. Jake wasn't always into pigeons. In fact, a year ago, he couldn't tell a homing pigeon from a city bird scavenging breadcrumbs in the park. But things changed the day he visited his Uncle Ron, a retired firefighter and lifelong pigeon racer who lived just an hour outside of town. Ron had an entire shed, carefully converted into a pigeon loft, nestled behind his red brick farmhouse. Jake had gone there on a simple weekend visit, but that visit turned into a revelation. You ever watch one of these birds fly back from 200 miles away and land right where it was born? Uncle Ron had asked, pride gleaming in his weather-worn face. Jake hadn't, but the idea stuck with him. Birds navigating hundreds of miles, driven not by map or compass, but instinct and training. It seemed like magic. Uncle Ron let him hold a bird, a soft gray cock with flecks of iridescent green on its neck. It cooed in Jake's hand, calm, alive, aware. That moment was the spark. Now, a year later, Jake was setting up his own loft. He had built it by hand, modeled after Ron's, but with a few modifications he had researched online. A simple shed with proper ventilation, a secure trapdoor system, and perch boxes made of cedar wood. He had just gotten his first dozen birds a few months ago, young, healthy squabs from a breeder in Ohio with a good reputation and solid bloodlines. Getting started had been intimidating. Pigeon racing wasn't exactly a mainstream hobby where Jake lived, and he didn't know anyone his age who was into it. Most of the racers he found online or at local meets were older men with decades of experience. That didn't discourage him, though. Jake was patient, curious, and ready to learn. And Uncle Ron was always a phone call away. That morning, as Jake stepped into the loft, the birds stirred gently. Some remained perched, while others fluttered down to the floor to peck at the grit he had laid out. He had named a few of them, not very original names, just ones to help him remember. Flash, Dusty, Sky, Midnight. Each bird had its own personality, its own rhythm. Jake had learned a lot in the past few months. The first thing he had to understand was that pigeon racing wasn't just about birds flying fast. It was about care, consistency, and connection. These weren't just animals, they were athletes. And like any athlete, they needed training, diet, and discipline. The first thing Uncle Ron taught him was how important a proper loft was. It wasn't enough to throw up a cage and toss some birds in. The loft had to be safe, clean, and well-ventilated. Pigeons are sensitive creatures. Drafts, mold, or excess moisture could wreck their health. Jake had spent weeks perfecting the design. He built it on elevated wooden beams to keep the floor dry, installed a slanted roof to allow rain runoff, and added screened windows on opposite sides for cross-ventilation. Inside, he kept a strict cleaning schedule. Every morning after feeding, he scooped droppings and swept the floor. The pigeons seemed to appreciate it. A clean loft was a calm loft. Once the birds were settled, the next step was feeding. Jake quickly learned that diet could make or break a racing pigeon. Uncle Ron had told him, think of them like Olympic runners. You wouldn't feed an Olympian fast food every day, would you? So Jake researched feeds, learning the difference between grains and legumes, when to offer high-carb mixes for recovery, and when to switch to high-protein diets for muscle repair. He bought quality feed from a supplier in New Jersey and mixed it himself every week, adding vitamins to the water twice a week. He even tried garlic and apple cider vinegar in small amounts, tricks he picked up from online forums and fellow racers. But of all the lessons, the most surprising was how much time pigeons needed to train. Jake had this image in his head of birds just naturally knowing how to race, but that wasn't how it worked. Racing pigeons had to be conditioned slowly. It began with letting them fly around the loft freely, then gradually increasing their range. Jake would start with short tosses, driving a few miles down the road, and releasing them. At first, not all of them would come back quickly. Some took hours. A few even overnight in trees or barns. But each time they learned. And each time they got faster. One of his favorites, a blue bar hen named Lucy, had taken a while to adjust. She was skittish, unsure, always the last to come back. But Jake didn't give up on her. He trained her gently, never pushed too hard. After 2 months, she was leading the pack, coming in strong with wings slicing through the wind like knives. The fourth tip Ron passed on, and one Jake found crucial, was record-keeping. "The birds won't tell you how they feel," Ron had said. "You've got to know." Jake started a notebook, then moved to a spreadsheet. He logged feeding schedules, weight, training distances, return times, health issues, and molting dates. Over time, patterns emerged. He could see when a bird was peaking or when one needed rest. It gave him an edge, even before his first real race. Finally, the most important lesson Jake learned was patience. Pigeon racing was not instant. Birds took time to mature, to trust their trainer, and to perform consistently. There were setbacks. One weekend, 3 of his birds didn't return from a 30-mile toss. It crushed him. He drove the roads looking for signs, posted in local groups, even checked animal control. Only one came back, exhausted and injured. He named her Hope. Hope's return taught him that racing pigeons was about more than speed or trophies. It was about resilience, trust, and the bond between bird and human. Jake tended to her wing, kept her isolated for weeks, and eventually, she flew again. She never raced like she used to, but she became a symbol for his loft, a reminder that care and heart were the true foundation of the sport. Months passed. Jake joined a local racing club in Allentown. He was the youngest member by far, but they welcomed him. Some of the older men, folks like Gerald, Martin, and Kenny, gave him tips, invited him to races, even offered birds for breeding. There was no YouTube tutorial for everything, but there was a community. And in that community, Jake found more than competition. He found camaraderie. As fall rolled around, Jake entered his first official race, a 100-mile sprint. His hands trembled as he loaded his birds into the carrier. Lucy was among them, along with Flash, Hope, and 3 others. He drove them to the club station, tagged them with electronic bands, and watched as they were released into the sky. The wait was unbearable. Jake sat by the loft, stopwatch in hand, scanning the horizon. When the first bird came into view, wings pumping, head high, his heart leapt. It was Lucy, of course. She trapped in like a pro. One by one, the others followed. Hope came last, slower but steady. They weren't the fastest that day, but they all made it back. That, to Jake, was victory. That night, Jake sat on his porch, looking up at the stars. He thought about how far he'd come, from a clueless beginner to a proud loft owner. There was still much to learn, but he was on the right path.